Greetings, YouTube. This is the Garage Autonomist. I want to thank everybody who tuned in last night when I tried to do a quick follow-up to cultural appropriation by talking about cultural appreciation. And for some reason, I was streaming from my house last night, and it just got really choppy and weird. I made two different attempts. So, it was really cool also having, like, Jenny obviously had time to tune in at the time, and unfortunately, it just wasn't happening. Found out later that my cable company was having issues with the internet on their end in my neighborhood. And then on top of it all, I believe, because we have two different Wi-Fi networks in the house. So the one that I typically get on is the one that everyone else in the house doesn't use. So I may have needed to just move closer to the router. Who knows? The settings seemed okay. But anyway, I'm not going to bore you guys with all that technical shit. I'm just going to go ahead and get started on this. So I wanted to talk about cultural appreciation and cultural fusion. Now, I only wanted to touch more on two things that I had mentioned in the last stream regarding cultural appropriation, and that is cultural appreciation, where one likes or even embraces someone else's culture out of respect, love, and of course just plain liking it. Now, before I go on, I just wanted to go back to the Marc Jacobs dreadlock flap, which I also touched on in the stream from yesterday. Dreadlocks are dreadlocks. I talked about where they came from and how they have meaning in one part of the world or culture, and how they can only be a hairstyle in other parts, because ultimately all of us can grow them. My issue was both, across, regardless of race and culture. Ethnicity. My issue was both with the critics, who really were not coming from a historically sound place, and Jacobs, who just simply got all white boy defensive as always. The critics, while correct in pointing out the dreads have a cultural meaning, were not fully correct in that the dreads have existed before and outside of Rastafarianism and some cultures of African people on the continent. Jacobs is just a fucking ripoff artist, looking to make a buck. And throughout the history of fashion design as a whole, the industry has always been more of an exploiter of other people's cultures, or even subcultures like punk or hip hop, in order to sell clothes to people who can afford them. The very nature of that industry is about superficiality and soulless buying and selling of the human experience. My last word on Jacobs' use of, say, the color dreadlocks is this: he wasn't even original about this. I remember when John Lydon, also known as Johnny Rotten, during the release of the Generic album by his band Public Image Limited, Lydon was sporting these colorful dreads that were multicolored, and they were multicolored, and they were mixed in with his natural hair. George Clinton at the same time was doing the same thing. I distinctly remember this is also the mid '80s. So George Clinton was still working with what were the names? Red Hot Chili Peppers, right? And I saw some video footage of him in the studio working with them. I forgot which album that was. But yeah, he too had like different colored dreadlocks and shit. And that was the 80s. So that was the mid 80s. So, fuck Marc Jacobs. He's not original in his show. And that's all I have to say. It's just a little, this is a little petty jab at him, really, if anything, just mainly around his shitty attitude about this thing. Too bad I don't know anything about fashion enough to comment on his designs, but as a person, I'll leave it at that. I'll go at his shitty personality. Anyway, cultural appreciation. So I'm just going to throw out a couple of examples, and then I'm probably going to sign off. Let me just check the chat room before I start. Yes, vegan anarchist. Capitalism causes cultural appropriation through consumerism. You're so right about that. 100% vegan anarchist. We can think of a million different examples of that. I remember even when as hip hop began to grow, and it was fine, that there were kids in the suburbs who were loving the music and wanted to learn breakdancing and all that shit. I don't have a problem with that. That's not appropriation, because these kids on their own learned, and being explorative, I guess, wanted to check out what hip hop was, and they did. But, some asshole in a suit figured out to take a whole compilation of like C-level rappers at the time, C-list rappers, and then they added to the package a breakdance pad, and then I think even shoulder pads. I mean, that shit was like mass produced, and it was sold. The commercials were ridiculous. It was like the hip hop breaking dance package, like kit. That's what it was. But see, there's a difference between somebody who says, dude, I love this dancing. I love this music. It's coming from a place that's completely alien to me, but I'm into it and I want to learn about it. And then there's a difference between that and then, say, somebody who just goes to the mall and literally buys a hip hop kit and sold by capitalists. So thank you for that example, vegan anarchist. Let me just go into one example of cultural appreciation. So I knew a white guy who came from an abusive home. He did drugs all throughout his teens and early 20s, and at one point was sentenced to something like 7+ years or so for theft in the Huntsville unit, because, he was, to keep up his habit, he was basically stealing and shit. When he got out, because of the time that he had inside, where he read a lot and he came to a spiritual place for himself, he embraced the West African religion of Ifa. Now, the practice as a healer and the divinity part meant so much to him that he went through the next, 20 years now, as a Babalao, which is a priest of that religion. And if you see him, green eyes, little blonde trimmed beard. I believe he keeps his head shaved now these days. I'm not going to go there for why I think he keeps it shaved, but he'll kill me. But if you see him, he wears the customary robes, the hat. He's always chewing on those damn licorice sticks. But he's not going to talk to you in some fake weird accent. He's not wearing a costume to look cool or to make fun of someone or wear somebody else's culture on his back to get attention. He dresses this way because this is the life that fits for him, and that's the life that he's actually made for him, and he that for himself, because that's who he is now. I have another friend of mine who is a drummer. She's a black woman. And when her son started college this past year, she actually got a full music scholarship for herself to study in Osaka, because she fell in love with taiko, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, hopefully. Taiko, or rather Japanese percussion. So here you have this black woman in her mid-40s, and she's going to kill me for saying that, and who didn't speak a lick of Japanese. She sent videos of her playing all the percussion styles ranging from jazz, rock, African, Latin, and Latin Caribbean. And she got into the school. And she went there because she loves Japanese taiko. She particularly likes those large drums. And her big thing is that maybe she might be so good that she might could join one of those all women troops that travel all over the world and do those shows. You know who I'm talking about. I can't. But right by now, there's like a whole bunch of other troops just like the one group that I can't think of. Let's talk about the instances of cooks who take one cuisine and they mix it with another. This has gone on throughout centuries of cooks who have lived and worked in societies that were trading with other nations. Now, today we have Asian chefs who love Mexican food, and some of them have gone and thought of things such as the sushi roll. The sushi roll that's like a burrito, or the sushi ritos. I ate one. I couldn't even fucking finish it. It was kind of gross. But the point is that there's nothing wrong with a fusion of two different cultures. I don't think anyone's being exploited in this way. And the only time I think that anybody takes something of someone else's also and then tries to claim it as if it never existed, is specifically only in that issue. But none of these chefs or none of the cooks out here, or none of these little trendy fusion places that you see all over everywhere, or the food trucks, no one's claiming that the other culture that they're mixing it with something else is something that they themselves have created. Now, if you go to your average Chinatown, you might find okra there. And it's been highly disputed for decades as to where the origins of okra have come from. I'm not going to try to get into that too much. But because it's mainly people say, no, it came from West Africa. Some people say, no, it came from North Africa. And then others say, no, it was in South Asia, or it was in South Asia all along. The thing is that it would make sense that okra made its way into Asia if it did not grow there by itself from the beginning, because of the Silk Road, or the Silk Road route that ranged from the Horn of Africa, the Indian subcontinent, Persia, Arabia, and Europe. The point is that despite a long history of people clashing in war, we have also traded and took on other people's food, art, engineering, and agricultural methods. Obviously, we do these things because we appreciate those other things. So my point is that it is okay for us to embrace and love other people's culture without exploiting somebody else's shit or making fun of it or costuming it ourselves in it, and we can enjoy and embrace these things without appropriating it. Let's see. Let me look in the chat real quick. Oh, what's up, V-Dub? What's up, man? He says that these images are official. Thank you. Okra. Yeah. Food is important. I love it. I've been to a taco place run by Asians in Long Island. Yeah, V-Dub. I see those places too. Now, I wouldn't consider those exactly fusion places, but they definitely are shitty places. I don't know about your experience, but whenever I go to the Korean-owned Mexican places, man, I've only been to two of them, and that was literally almost 10 years ago. I will never step foot in another one again. It is not, because it's not like they're taking Korean. I shouldn't just say that all of them are owned by Koreans, but the ones that I've been to were definitely owned by Koreans. He says Taco King is good. Got to go there. I'll check them out. But the Korean owned taco places, man, it's like the food is bland as fuck. Like, I think they would be better off if they actually gave us the Korean style beef, like the way they marinate Korean beef. If they actually put that in the tacos, I might actually like that better. But they're just like taking shit. And what's crazy, what's even more ironic, is that they typically have Mexican people working in those kitchens and cooking their own food, quote unquote. And it still comes out shitty tasting. And it's all because I think the owners are just paranoid that if their own Mexican cooks happen to make their own food better, they may actually be a threat and may decide to go on and become competition, which they very well could. I'm lucky that I have a taco place right by my job, ran and owned by Mexicans. It's the best. And yes, right around the corner from that is one of the Korean owned Mexican places. They're fucking complete and utter shit. All right, y'all. So here's what's going on. Tomorrow is going to be food for thought. I'm going to be talking a little bit about masculinity and manhood. Who truly owns the definition? The paper alpha or the progressive thinking radical male? I'm gonna point to myself for that because it's not like what I have to say is going to be earth shattering or great that you haven't heard already in any of my past videos. Just going to be touching on the fact that you know a lot of dudes out there who I think are really not good examples of men should not be defining what masculinity is. Sorry, I just thought about this guy named Armored Skeptic. I gotta find that footage of him drinking out of scotch out of a fucking plastic cup. I've got to use that for a background image for tomorrow's cast. All right, y'all. So thank you so much for listening. This is all I had to say about it. Please look in the links in the low bar that I put for you to read up more. There's better think pieces on the issue that I like. But I put that there for your own reading pleasure. Thank you so much for listening. I want to thank Vegan Anarchist and VDub for listening in. I want to thank Jenny McDermott for listening in last night on my 2 failed attempts because of the buffering going on in my neighborhood. Peace and fuck the alt-right. Yes, Vegan Anarchist, fuck the alt-right. Fuck them forever. So, peace, y'all. I will see you tomorrow night on the Food for Thought channel.